Malik, a 12-year-old black boy with an envelope clutched tight in his hand, walked into the busy lobby of First Commonwealth Bank on a sunny Monday morning in Chicago. The big glass doors closed behind him with a quiet thud, muting the sounds of the bustling street. He paused just inside, glancing around at the high ceilings and polished floor. Most of the customers in line were adults, dressed in suits or work uniforms, having quick, murmured conversations or checking their phones. The bank tellers behind the counter moved quickly, stamping papers and calling out the next number in line without much time for smiles. Malik could feel people looking at him, some with brief curiosity, others barely giving him a glance before turning back to their business. Still, it was enough to make him nervous. Holding the envelope closer to his chest, he could almost hear his heart beating. He replayed in his mind the steps his mom, Denise, had walked him through the night before. Say good morning, hand over the deposit slip, speak clearly and politely. He wanted to do this right, not just for himself, but to prove he was responsible. Enough to handle his own savings from mowing lawns all summer. Drawing a deep breath, Malik stepped forward, ready to take his place at the counter. Across the counter, Patricia, a bank teller who had worked at First Commonwealth Bank for over 15 years, noticed Malik walking up. Patricia, who always wore thick glasses perched on the tip of her nose, glanced at him over the rims and couldn't help but feel uneasy. She crossed her arms, tapping her fingers on her sleeve, already assuming that this unfamiliar young kid, especially a kid alone, might cause some trouble or maybe was at the wrong place. She carried that guarded feeling into her work all the time, especially when the branch got busy and she was tired. As Malik stopped at her counter, Patricia pressed her lips together to force a sort of smile, but it came out stiff and unconvincing. She didn't look Malik in the eye for more than a second, but she spoke up with a sharp tone. "Can I help you?" There was barely a hint of patience in her voice. Malik, who had been practicing what to say, suddenly felt his stomach twist in knots. He hesitated, glancing at his shoes, before mustering the courage to respond. The way Patricia looked at him and the coldness in her words made him feel even smaller, almost as if he did not really belong there at all. Malik swallowed and took a shaky breath, trying to remember every word his mom had told him the night before. He reached into his pocket, his hands trembling a little, and pulled out both the envelope filled with his hard-earned cash and his bright green savings card. I'd like to deposit this into my account," he said softly, his voice barely reaching over the steady noise in the bank lobby. He placed the envelope on the worn counter and offered the card with careful fingers, doing his best to steady himself so his nerves did not show. Patricia looked down at the envelope, her eyebrows knitting together in open doubt. She picked it up, turning it over as if she expected something to fall out or for the contents to suddenly reveal a problem. The envelope was a little wrinkled from being in his pocket all morning, but Malik had counted the bills 3 times last night to make sure everything was in order. Patricia's eyes darted briefly to her co-workers, a silent look, almost as if she was waiting for backup or expecting to catch something out of place. Without even hiding her suspicion, she finally glanced at Malik. In a flat, questioning tone, she asked, "And where did you get this money?" The question landed heavy between them, full of quiet accusations that made Malik's throat feel tight as he tried to find the right words to answer. Malik's cheeks burned as he noticed heads starting to turn in his direction. A woman waiting in line glanced over with curiosity. A man near the door paused mid-conversation to see what was happening. Malik could sense their eyes on him, following Patricia's every question. He gripped the edge of the counter tighter and tried to focus his gaze on a spot just above Patricia's shoulder, willing himself not to let the hurt show on his face. He wanted desperately to answer clearly, but his voice felt stuck in his throat. Patricia, not satisfied with his answer, leaned in a little, her voice growing sharper. "Are you sure this is your money? You're not trying to do anything you shouldn't, right?" she asked, loud enough for a few others to hear. The words stung, heavy with the suggestion that Malik was doing something wrong just by being there. He looked down at his shoes, feeling his confidence slip away bit by bit. For a split second, the idea of just grabbing his envelope and walking out seemed tempting. He wondered if it would be easier to give up and avoid the embarrassment. Still, Malik tried to hold his ground, telling himself over and over not to let her see him cry or back down. With the line behind him getting longer, Malik cleared his throat and tried one more time. "My mum showed me how to handle my money," he said, doing his best to sound confident, even though his heart was thudding. "She's a manager over at Mercy Hospital downtown. She let me come by myself today because she trusts me." He hoped that mentioning his mum's position would make Patricia let her guard down, maybe even treat him with a little bit of respect. But Patricia barely reacted. She did not look impressed and did not bother to respond to anything he said about his mom. Instead, she stayed focused on her doubt, still eyeing the envelope and Malik with suspicion. Without lowering her voice, Patricia asked, "Is your mother here? I need to speak with an adult before I process this," making it clear that she did not believe Malik should be at the bank by himself. The words from Patricia landed hard. Malik could feel the tension in his shoulders rise, and his hands tightened around his savings card. The people behind him murmured, their impatience mixing with quiet curiosity. That question and the way Patricia looked at him made him realize she was judging him for how he looked, not for what he was actually doing. Malik could not shake the feeling that no matter what he said, he would still be seen as just a kid who did not belong. Near the end of the row of counters, an older man named Walter had been waiting in line with his checkbook in hand. Walter was in his late 70s, a lifelong Chicagoan with silver hair and a habit of noticing more than he spoke. He watched the exchange between Malik and Patricia, his brow tightening as he picked up on the tension. Walter glanced at the woman next to him, who shook her head with a quiet sigh, and noticed a few others shifting uncomfortably, whispering to one another about how the boy was being treated. The air in the bank felt heavier every minute the situation dragged on. Still, Patricia stood firm behind the counter, arms folded and lips pressed tight. She looked past Malik as though he were invisible and repeated, "I'm sorry, but I can't process this without your parent present." Her tone was just as cold as before, and there was not a trace of empathy in her voice. It did not matter. How many people in the lobby were unhappy with how things were going? Malik felt stuck in place, not sure if he should argue, ask to speak to someone else, or just leave and try another day. With everyone watching, he felt more alone than ever, standing there while his sense of fairness was ignored right out in the open. Malik's hands shook as he reached into his pocket for his phone, ignoring the stares from the line behind him. Keeping his head down, he dialed his mum's number. When she answered, her voice sounded a little rushed but warm, and Malik tried to stay calm. "Mom, I'm at the bank, and they won't let me deposit the money," he said, his voice trembling. "The lady here says I need an adult, and she doesn't believe the money's mine." For a second, all the emotions he had been bottling up started to come out, and he sniffed, trying hard not to cry in front of everyone. On the other end of the line, Monique immediately understood how upset her son was. She could hear the unfairness in his voice and felt a surge of anger herself. "Stay right there, Malik. I'm leaving now. I'll be at the bank in 15 minutes, she said firmly. Her promise brought a flicker of hope back to Malik's eyes. He swallowed hard and nodded, almost able to breathe again. Hanging up, he clutched his phone tightly, telling himself that things might change once his mum arrived. For the first time since he walked in, it felt like he would not have to face it all alone. Malik stood awkwardly near the counter, trying his best to keep out of the way while still staying close enough so his spot in line would not be lost. He could feel people watching him when they thought he was not looking, a few with sympathy, some with open curiosity. The minutes dragged by, each one stretching out longer than the last. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, gripping his phone so tightly it nearly slipped from his sweaty palm. Once or twice, someone from the line gave him a little nod or a quiet smile, but it did not do much to ease the tight feeling in his chest. Patricia moved on to help other customers, but she kept glancing over at Malik, her look growing more annoyed by the second. It was clear she saw him as nothing but trouble, a kid taking up space. The cheerful music that always played quietly in the bank seemed to fade, until the only thing Malik could hear was the echoing hush of people whispering behind their hands. He found himself counting the tiles on the ceiling to distract from the nerves twisting in his stomach, but nothing seemed to help the tension around him loosen. Waiting was the hardest part. He needed his mom to show up and finally bring some relief. At last, the wide glass doors of the bank swung open, catching everyone's attention as Monique strode in. Her navy blue suit was sharp, and her presence filled the room in a way that made people straighten up a little where they stood. She did not waste time looking around. Her focus was completely on Malik, who broke away from his spot by the counter as soon as he saw her. Malik nearly ran across the lobby to reach her, barely able to keep his relief from spilling out in tears. He wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug, and for a moment every bit of stress and humiliation clung to her shoulder, the place he felt safest. Monique hugged him back just as firmly, giving his back a reassuring rub. She glanced down and pressed her cheek to the top of his head. Without needing to ask a thing, she seemed to understand how hard the weight had been for him. With a quiet promise, she told Malik, "I'm here now. We're going to make this right." The people in the lobby, silent up until then, watched the pair with newfound respect, realizing there was more to the story than just a boy with an envelope. Monique straightened her jacket and led Malik confidently back toward the counter, ready to put an end to the whole ordeal. Monique walked straight over to the counter, switching to a controlled, steady pace that left no room for doubt about why she was here. She looked Patricia in the eye and spoke with a voice that was quiet but carried through the bank. "Can you explain why my son was not allowed to deposit his own money? I'd like to understand your reasoning." The way Monique asked the question made it clear she expected a real answer and would not accept another brush-off. Patricia, caught off guard by Monique's confidence and presence, seemed to shrink a little. She fumbled with some papers and cleared her throat, but the nerves showed in the way her hands shook. Trying to gather herself, she managed, "I was just following policy, Mom. We have to be careful with transactions made by minors, and I did not mean to cause any trouble." Even as she said this, it was obvious she was struggling, suddenly unsure of the rules she had been hiding behind. Other customers leaned in, watching to see what would happen next, and Patricia realized she had not expected a parent like Monique, someone who would push back and demand fairness with such calm strength. The atmosphere in the bank changed as everyone waited for Monique's response. Monique took a slow breath and in a measured tone addressed Patricia and the people watching. "Just to be clear," she began, "I am Monique Adams, the CEO of Chicago Community Credit Union." The words hung in the air. For a moment there was total silence, then a ripple of surprise moved through the lobby. Customers exchanged stunned glances, and even the security guard standing by the entrance straightened up. Most folks had only ever seen Monique's name on letters, or maybe in a news article, but now she was standing right in front of them, handling this in person. Patricia's face lost what little color it had left. Her jaw moved as if she was about to speak, but she could not seem to find the right words. The earlier confidence she had shown was gone, replaced with a panic she could not hide. She kept glancing from Monique to Malik, realizing that denying service to the CEO's own child was a mistake that could not be smoothed over with simple excuses. The other bank employees suddenly looked uneasy, as if all of them wished they had handled things differently too. Whispers spread through the lobby, and every eye fixed on Monique, waiting for what she would say or do next. Monique paused just long enough for everyone to really hear her, and then she spoke out clearly, so nobody could miss her point. She said, "This situation is not just about my son. Every person who walks into this bank deserves to be treated with respect, no matter how old they are or how they look. That is the standard we hold at our credit union, and it is what every customer should expect everywhere." Her words seemed to linger in the space. A few people nodded. Some even looked a little embarrassed as they remembered their own experiences or thoughts earlier in the afternoon. Turning to the counter again, Monique added, "Now, I want Malik's deposit to go through without any more issues. That is not a request. It is the right thing to do." Before Patricia could even think to object, a younger employee from the far end of the counter hurried over, clearly wanting to make up for what had just happened. He smiled apologetically at Malik, took the envelope, and processed the deposit. Right there, quickly and smoothly. Malik watched as the transaction finally went through, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since he entered the place. The whole lobby seemed to breathe easier, even though no one was quite sure what to say next. Malik stood quietly, watching as the employee finished entering the details and stamped his deposit slip. Relief washed over him, but it was tangled up with something heavier, something like disappointment. He understood that if it were not for Monique's position as the boss, things probably would not have changed. The feeling stuck with him, making it hard to celebrate. He tucked the slip into his pocket, his hands still shaky from everything that had happened. Monique noticed his mood and reached over, gently squeezing his hand. The warmth and strength in her touch helped steady him. She knelt down so she could look him right in the eyes and spoke just for him, her voice soft but steady. "I am proud of you," she said. "What happened today was not fair, and I promise I'm going to do everything I can to make sure no other kid has to go through what you did. You should never feel less than anyone in this world." Malik nodded, feeling her sincerity, and some of the tension in his chest eased away. Even with all the embarrassment of the afternoon, he knew she meant every word, and that gave him a little hope things might really change. Patricia, still standing behind the counter, looked down at her hands, then over at Malik and Monique. Her entire face showed how shaken she was by what had happened. Trying to steady her voice, she finally said, "I am truly sorry for the way I treated you both today. I realize now that I was wrong, not just in following the rules, but in letting my own assumptions get in the way of being fair. I never meant to make you feel small or unwelcome." Her voice almost cracked at the end, and she blinked hard, fighting back tears she could not quite hold in. The bank lobby went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when everyone is holding their breath. You could tell that people were waiting to see how Monique would respond, some nervously shifting, others just staring. Malik kept his eyes on the floor, chewing his lip, caught between wanting to forgive and still feeling a little hurt. Monique just stood there for a second, giving Patricia a long look. The weight of the moment was heavy, and it was clear this was not just about one afternoon. This was about how people saw each other, and if that could ever really change for the better. Monique took another deep breath, locking eyes with Patricia, and nodded. "Thank you for your apology, Patricia," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I accept it, but I need to be clear. What happened today is not going to be overlooked. At Chicago Community Credit Union, there is zero tolerance for any kind of discrimination in any form. Every single person who comes through these doors deserves to be treated with respect, and that means we have to do better." She paused and turned so everyone could hear. "Going forward, every employee will take part in new training that covers diversity, equity, and how we show respect to all of our members, no exceptions. This is for our staff and for everyone who walks in expecting to be heard and seen." There was a moment of silence. Then a few customers started clapping. Soon, the soft applause spread through the lobby. Not rowdy but genuine, a sign people agreed with her stand. Even some of the other employees looked relieved, maybe even hopeful about the changes coming. The tense feeling that had filled the air finally eased up, replaced by something lighter, a spark of hope that things were getting better. Monique caught Malik's eye and gave his hand a squeeze, feeling a little more certain herself too. After the clapping faded, Walter, an elderly man who had been waiting quietly in line, stepped forward and laid a gentle hand on Malik's shoulder. Leaning in with a kind smile, he said, "I saw what you went through, son. Years ago, I had something similar happen to me right here in Chicago when I was about your age. Folks made quick judgments, but I kept showing them who I really was, and believe me, people can learn and grow. You stood your ground today, and that takes guts." Walter's voice was warm and steady, and Malik looked up at him, surprised, but grateful. Walter nodded and added, "Things change when people speak up. You helped make that happen today." Other customers, inspired by Walter's words, began to share their own stories. One woman reminded Malik and everyone else that her daughter had once been overlooked at her own job, but it pushed her to work harder and stand proud. Another customer complimented Malik for his patience and said she hoped her own kids would show the same courage. All around the lobby, people were connecting in new ways, trading looks of understanding. For the first time that day, Malik felt truly welcome and realized that even tough moments could bring people together. Later that week, Monique gathered all the staff together in the main meeting room at Chicago Community Credit Union. It was a bigger group than usual, with people from different departments and even a few folks who usually worked at the drive-through window. The air was serious, but you could also feel some curiosity and even hope about what was coming. Monique started by talking about what had happened with Malik. She did not sugarcoat anything. She spoke honestly about how her own son had felt dismissed and how that hurt not just him, but everyone who had witnessed it. "This is bigger than following procedures," she told them. "It's about remembering there's a human behind every transaction. We all have blind spots, but it's up to us to notice when those get in the way of fairness." One by one, employees shared their own stories. Some admitted they had never paid attention to things like this before, while others opened up about times they had felt left out themselves. The conversation got real, with some people tearing up and others just nodding along quietly. By the end, there was a sense of togetherness and commitment. Everyone seemed ready to start fresh and work toward making the credit union a place where every member really felt like they belonged. Patricia, moved by everything that had happened and what she had heard during Monique's meeting, decided it was time for real change in her own life. She signed up to volunteer with some of the community outreach projects organized by Chicago Community Credit Union. It was not just about showing up for a shift. She wanted to actually listen to people, understand what they faced, and be part of finding solutions. The first weekend, she helped out at a job skills workshop on the South Side, handing out snacks and chatting with high school students about their dreams. There, she realized how just a little encouragement could change someone's outlook. Patricia wanted her actions to speak louder than promises. She showed up every week, helping with financial literacy classes and food drives, getting to know neighbors she used to just walk past. Her energy caught on. Other employees, seeing her commitment, started coming along too. Some brought their kids, others offered to organize events themselves. Before long, these projects were not just initiatives, they became a regular part of what the credit union did. The workplace shifted. People were kinder and more open, and there was a sense that anyone could belong. Even Malik noticed how different things felt when he came to visit his mum, and the change made both of them feel proud. A few weeks later, Malik walked back into Chicago Community Credit Union, holding a check he had earned from his part-time job after school. He felt different this time, more sure of himself, standing tall as he stepped up to the counter. As soon as he entered, Patricia recognized him and greeted him with a big smile, and several other staff waved at him, welcoming him back. There was no hesitancy, no awkwardness, just a simple sense of belonging. Even a new teller who had just started smiled and asked how his day was going. Malik handed over his deposit slip, and the whole process went smoothly. He noticed how warmly everyone treated not just him, but every customer who came in that day, chatting patiently and listening closely. For the first time, Malik truly felt respected and valued as a customer. He glanced around the room and saw community flyers and pictures from the volunteer events, with familiar faces smiling back at him from the photos. Afterwards, Monique joined him in the lobby. They sat together for a moment, both feeling proud, not just for themselves, but for everyone at the credit union. What had been a tough lesson had actually brought them closer. Together, they celebrated the new feeling in the air, a place where everyone was welcome, and kindness was finally the rule. Word got around on the South Side about what had happened at Chicago Community Credit Union, and pretty soon, people outside the branch were talking about it too. Neighbors started sharing the story at barbershops, churches, and school meetings. Some local papers even ran features on how the credit union decided to deal with the issue right out in the open, instead of just sweeping it under the rug. Other banks and companies began reaching out to Monique, asking for advice about setting up their own training and outreach programs. It was a new kind of buzz. Folks wanted to know how to build places where everyone truly belonged. The whole thing kept sparking conversations about fairness and equality, not just at the credit union, but all over the city. Schools talked more about including everyone. Community groups started inviting people from different backgrounds to their events. Even little local shops hung up signs about respect and treating people right, taking that idea to heart. Malik and Monique's story about taking a stand and not backing down stuck with people. Whenever customers came in, they would see Malik's picture with his mum on the community board, a reminder that one tough day changed things for the better. People now believed that speaking up and working together really could change the future, making it fairer for everyone.